Greetings and welcome to another Medieval Engineers Minion Village. Oh yes, we are back in the Minion Village in Medieval Engineers for another build. We're going to add more facilities for my lovely minions to make use of. This blacksmith that I built last time has been working out rather nicely. The minions have been learning the ways of forging. Well, they've been standing around dumbly pretending that they were learning the ways of forging, but I'm sure the time will come when they are fully accomplished blacksmiths. Well, at least I hope so, because the more independent the minions are, the better as far as I'm concerned. Speaking of independent, I'm getting sick and tired of providing for all the minions' food needs. Conjuring food is taking up my valuable time, so this week we're going to build them a farm. Yes, a farm, and in fact a windmill or magic mill of some sort. And a farm. We're going to start by kind of going up here onto the hillside, which I think is probably the best place for a farm. We've got nice, fairly gentle hills, and what I kind of envisage is like a rock pillar rising up out of the ground with like the windmill on it. So I'm going to use this pill shape thing, bit of sort of landscape generation tool, I suppose, in order to sort of like raise a pillar up initially. I don't want it to be just another windmill. I mean, a windmill is a windmill is a windmill to a certain extent. There's only so much you can deviate from the form, although I suspect I could probably be a bit more creative if I really tried. But I like the idea of kind of having a rock pillar like this, you see, kind of sticking up. I mean, it's obviously just a pill at the moment. So if we chip away at it to make it look a little bit more realistic, what I've done here is I've just gotten the sloping piece, and I've taken it off the voxel grid so that I can just chip away, and I'm just kind of orbiting around the rock pillar that I created, and just deleting bits of it in order to rough it up and to make it look a little bit more natural and look a little bit more like the rock pillar I have in mind. And there you go, that is kind of the first pass result. As I looked at it, as I look at it, it's a bit too small, I think. The windmill's going to take up a fair amount of space. It's going to have quite a footprint, so it needs to be a lot bigger. So I just basically grab the old square, cube even, grab the old cube piece and start to fill out the dimensions of this, really just bringing it right out, quite a long way actually, because I envisage this being quite a significant structure. I want it to be right up. I want the blades to be basically above the trees, and and of course the houses which are below the trees, so that there's a clear wind blowing right the way through the valley. That's the theory anyway. That's what I've kind of got in my mind. I also, when I looked at this, I like the idea of doing a bit more landscaping around the village and creating more levels and things. I'm sorry if that made you dizzy just then. And so, I've decided to kind of cut off the land, as you can see here, and then flatten it. This is a little bit of a distraction, I will admit. This isn't really, strictly necessary for building the farm, but it was something that I decided to mess around with, because I've been thinking for a while about what I'm going to do about this end of the village. I don't want the village to just kind of go straight through with a single road that you can see all the way along, so by effectively capping it at the end, I've created a bit more interest to the village, and we can do something with that later, which we will. But let's get on with the windmill, because that is the most important thing that I wanted to get done with this build. So we start off by laying the foundations into the rock pillar that we have created, and then rising it up. I went for this shape. I didn't want to have just a square windmill. I wanted something, that was a little bit... I mean, windmills, I think, are traditionally round, aren't they? Or possibly they are traditionally this shape, in which case I've completely failed to try and make something a little bit unusual. I did want to make it out of stone. The reason it kind of wound up being this shape is because that's sort of the shape of the rock pillar, so I wanted it to kind of smoothly rise up out of the rock pillar, like following the same kind of dimensions as it. And we rise up like this, like tapering in, and I'm a little bit worried about sort of support here, so I wind up putting in a bunch of pillars on the inside, which whether or not these actually help in the long run, I'm not sure, but we keep sort of like pushing it up. And this is very much like a lot of my builds, actually more so than a lot of my builds. This is a very organic process of just kind of seeing how it looked, building, seeing how it looked. Most of my builds I've got a much clearer idea of what I actually want it to look like in my head, whether that be because I've looked at pictures of similar buildings and stuff, and I've got that as a kind of an image that I'm aiming for. But I specifically wanted to avoid that in this build. One of the things I found is that because of that fact, because I've been looking at sort of like, real medieval buildings for inspiration, the Minion village is looking very traditional, which is fine, you know, it looks very pretty and everything, but this is, at the end of the day, the Wonder Workshop world, you know, and the Minion village exists in the world with the Wonder Workshop and with myself, the wizard of the Wonder Workshop, so I thought, you know, it might be nice to inject a little bit more fantasy into the Minion village. And this is something that I'm going to probably try and carry through a bit more in some other buildings, and I may even revisit some of my existing buildings and try and just fantasy it up a little bit. But anyway, with this specific build, which was continuing quite nicely, I've cut out considerable chunks because there was an awful lot of faffing about. A lot of this standing about, looking at it, thinking, you know, does that look all right? And I think, you know, to a certain extent, with the materials and the blocks that we have available, your options are somewhat limited at the moment. I tried kind of, you know, putting bits like this on, like I want to break up the design a little bit, break up the silhouette of the building, and there's only so many pieces that you can use to do that, and you know, it causes problems, as you can see here. Actually, I mean, even without that lip around it, like, I just haven't given it enough height, so it goes up another tier, which is fine actually. In fact, if anything, I think I was being quite conservative as far as the height goes, and even at this height, actually, as you will see as the video progresses, I have lots of problems getting these blades to work in a satisfactory way and to sort of fit in with the rest of the build. I don't want it to just be flat-fronted. This is kind of like one of the sources of the problem, and also, you know, I think one of the most interesting things, one of the challenges of the build was I didn't just want a flat-fronted building. I wanted there to be layers to it. I wanted there to be, you know, the blades just missing certain, you know, other sections of the building, and these, like, the blades are pretty rough at the moment, as you can see. I was really just experimenting to see if I had clearance and stuff, and it, you know, it turns cleanly, but you know, it just looks like a normal, like, windmill stuck on top of like a rock pillar on a little building. Like, in fact, it was like a small windmill stuck on top of a rock pillar. So I really wasn't happy at this point, and I play around an awful lot. I delete, you know, these bits, and I try and create like a little U shape for the blades to go into. But this is ultimately not going to be successful because, you know, they're just too close together. If they were perhaps a little bit further apart, you know, in line with the width of the blades, the actual windmill blades or the windmill sails, then you might be able to do that. But you know, they were too close, and as soon as I try and extend the blades anymore, as you can see, bam, they just collide again with the object. So we have to rethink. We have to get rid of these bits, which is exactly what we do. But I think, you know, I was on to the right idea. By trying to create visual interest, by trying to create sections of the building that these blades just miss. It's very difficult to do that laterally with the blades coming down. I mean, the building would have to be quite a bit wider, I think, and I wanted to constrain it to be, you know, in line with that rock pillar that it's on. And as you see, like, I've deleted a few more bits, and we're still getting problems. The idea here was that I would have the blade sweeping behind like a wall, but you know, there were issues with blade placement. In the end, I decided actually the easiest thing to do would be to create whole blades off that I could manipulate, so that I could control exactly where they were placed on the rotor, and that is what you see me doing right now. We create a blade piece, and it's always a good idea if you're sort of, especially if you find yourself repeatedly recreating little things like this, it's always a good idea to create a separate copy so that you can just copy and paste them. It saves yourself a lot of time. I also realized that I would need a framework around the rotor to give me the proper placement options that I wanted, because I wanted to set the blades back a little bit. As you can see, the rotor actually comes out quite far from the wall. It comes out a whole block from the wall, so by allowing myself to set the blades back slightly, it both pushes the blades closer to the main building and also gives me the clearance that I need at the front to have a wall section that the blades pass in front of, and that is ultimately what I wind up doing. As you can see, the framework is in place. The blades get placed, and well, they're almost clearance. There's almost clearance. As it turns out, those little bits of wall at the bottom are also just slightly too high, but we can fix that. So there we go, and another blade. And as we let it turn, it is turning freely, and one more blade. Bam! There we go. We need to get rid of that one. And does it work? Why isn't it moving? Why is it not moving? I ask myself. It looks like it's got clearance. Does it not have clearance? Surely it has clearance. We toggle it a few more times. Maybe it's this. Aha, look. Okay, right. There's these little sections of wall. We get rid of those. And... oh, look at that. It's turning freely. Now we have one blade shorter than the rest because of some of the toying around that we were doing involved us deleting bits of it to see if we were happy with that. So we stopped the blades, fix that, and start them again. But now we'll move again. What is going on, I hear you ask? Well, basically, it needs a kickstart. This is what it comes down to. The rotor is turning. It doesn't have the torque to actually get all the blades moving. But if you give it a kickstart, once it's moving, it can keep it moving. So that's a little trick for you if you find yourself building a windmill. If you go for very large blades like I have, you are right on the limit of what the rotor can actually turn. But because it is a balanced system, obviously all four blades, when one is being lifted, another is falling against gravity. So once you get it going, it should turn. And look, there it is, turning majestically. And as you can see, I was talking about having some sort of visual interest, something to set it apart a little bit from other windmill type designs, and I think having this wall section for it to pass behind is good. But, you know, right now it's not very inspired, is it? It is basically just a square, flat bit of wall with a couple of diagonals on the side. So it's time to gussy that up and to gussy up the interest. And what I'm sort of thinking here is that we'll have effectively an outer wall that sweeps around the building and then joins back up with it, and you'll have kind of almost this kind of mini courtyard in front with the blades passing through. This is kind of what I envisaged in my mind. So I carry on with this, and we've speeded this part up because you don't need to see. This is relatively simple building processes. It's just me throwing down some curved and straight wall sections to build that out. There you go, that's the sort of like the gist of it. On the other side, I decided to use the wide circles, the large circles, just so it's a bit asymmetric, which is another thing that I quite like, you know, making your building designs a little bit asymmetric so they don't look quite so homogeneous. So that's what I've done here. The rock pillar needed a little bit of tweaking here and there. So after doing that, we look to add detail. Pretty much, I'm happy with this now. It's just a case of adding more visual interest wherever I can. So, you know, putting a big arch in there so that you can see that they are indeed passing behind. Adding a little bit of extra sort of pointiness to bits. Ah, yes, and then the inevitable collapse. I took out a section of wall that really should have been fairly well supported, and what has happened? Well, some roof sections have collapsed. What it is with roof sections, I do not know, but they just seem to be the point of failure. If you're taking out wall sections and stuff, if there's any sort of excess structural stress on the building, quite often the walls will hold, but the roof sections will just go. So, yep, it happens again. It happens again on the other side. The other section of roof has fallen in. This is kind of my fault for not making sure that the interior was structurally sound before I started doing that. I could have fixed that by doing other bits and, you know, by building some internal structure. What I do now is I save it because, yep, I was going to delete a wall to try and repair it, and what happens? More comes down, more and more. Magically, this thing is now staying up. It's supported at the back by a couple of bricks. Anyway, I reload. I employ my wizard's powers, and I reload, and this time I decide to build up the internal structure first to provide the support that's needed in order to keep the whole thing standing whilst I repair the damage that was done. And that's what you see me doing here. I just decide to effectively build up two internal walls up the central shaft, which gives the whole structure a lot more rigidity and should keep the thing standing whilst I conduct repairs, and indeed for any extra building pieces that I need to do around, and also actually provides more interesting interior. So there you go. I have now completed the repairs. The roofs are back on. The building is getting close to a point that I'm happy with it, but it's still got a very flat front. So what I do is I take some pillar sections. Pillars are brilliant for adding a bit of exterior detail, and also these new sloping wall pieces. Also fantastic. You can chuck them on. We've got a peak and also the two slopes, so we can put a slope on either side and create a lovely kind of point. Flip a pillar over on its side and it becomes a, I don't know what you call that, like a shelf. Set it back to day using our magical wizard's powers, of course, and there we go. It's, well, it's not quite finished. But it's looking a lot better. It's looking a lot more interesting on the exterior. Now, if we just do a quick flyby, we realize that it needs a roof on the very top. So we do that. We stick a little peak on the top, which you can't really see from the ground, but again, it just adds a little bit. You can see that there's something there. You know, you can see the little lip, the bit of shadow that's cast by it. And of course, when you're flying around like a wizard, it looks a lot better. Now, I'm always looking for ways to break up the silhouette and sort of add a bit more visual detail. One of the things you can do is like these little walkways, which in this instance actually is quite practical because the inside of that tower is going to be full of machinery, but I don't know, I may have gone a little bit too far. I guess we'll see. Anyway, the building for now is more or less complete. It took me a long time to get to this stage. We'll just take in a few of the vistas that you can enjoy if you are working or just visiting around by the windmill here. Windmill Rock Farm, I think, is what it's going to be called. The rest of the farm, obviously, is completely non-existent at this stage. That will have to come in the next part. But for now, I think we will end there as we look down on the Minion village below. For all that remains is for me to say, thanks a lot for watching, everybody. I have been Weird Wizard, and I will see you later! And of course, we'll be returning to the Minion village to finish off building out the Minion's new farm next time. Tomorrow it is Retro Friday, and we'll be once again venturing through the Viking underworld in Rune. And of course, if you missed it, the new Kerbal Space Program series here on the channel, Juno 1 and a bit. The first episode is available now.